Okay, again, I do apologize for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but again, I'm going to be recording this, so if anybody wasn't able to make it, they'll be able to watch it at a later date. So again, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the No Time Like the Present Getting a Jump on Your EPA Brownfield Grant webinar. My name is Sean Vroom, and I'm the director of the NJIT TAB program. And I'll be presenting today's webinar. Before I get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, all the participants, you will be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please submit them through the Q&A pane, not the chat pane, if you can. A recording again of the webinar will be, and as well as a copy of the presentation will be made available on the NJIT TAB website under the resources tab. And I'd also ask that you please fill out a post-event survey. It's important that you do so because they let us know how we're doing, as well as enable us to provide future educational forums that are going to be relevant to your needs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn my camera off so I'm not a distraction while I present here. If you're not familiar with who the NJIT TAB program is, what we are is we're a Brownfield's technical assistance provider for Region 2. NJIT TAB has been an assistance provider since 2008, and we provided services in numerous EPA regions from Maine down to the Caribbean and as far west as Mississippi. All of the assistance that we provide is 100% free of charge. We're able to do that via a cooperative agreement that we have with US EPA. So basically, EPA provides us with the funding so that we can provide communities and individuals such as yourself with free services. So our assistance is available to communities throughout the entire Brownfields redevelopment process. NJIT TAB provides this assistance through three mechanisms. The first is our resource center. The second is our educational and and engagement forums. And third is our one-on-one direct technical assistance. So I'm just going to briefly explain what each one of these are. The first is the NJIT TAB Resource Center. So it's basically comprised of our website. It contains where there's a lot of valuable information. We have lots of resources such as federal and state funding sources. We have your state and EPA Brownfield contacts. We have previously recorded webinars and downloads of some of our workshop and seminar presentations. We have success stories. We have frequently asked questions listed on our website, as well as how-to videos. And we always provide successful grant applications from previous solicitations. We also have a hotline that's dedicated, and it's an easy to remember, as well as a easy to remember email address, which is on the slide that I have up. And we also provide information via our social media platforms. The second way that we provide assistance is through our educational and engagement forums. We design and we conduct workshops on Brownfield and Brownfield related topics such as EPA grant writing workshops, as well as our Brownfield basic workshops. Our seminars, they're a little bit deeper dive into Brownfields related issues such as environmental liability. We also design and hold half-day and full-day boot camps on topics such as green stormwater infrastructure on Brownfields and creative placemaking in Brownfields. Our webinar topics have included Brownfields Remediation 101, as well as how to get the right contractor on board. And we also, along with our EPA and state government partners, conduct all grantee meetings. And even with, having gone through some of the restrictions of COVID, we've transformed a lot of our in-person workshops into virtual events. So we've gotten very fluid in that, and it actually has allowed us to have a much wider reach in communicating with individuals and communities. So, and last, our third way of providing technical assistance is through our one-on-one interactions. As I mentioned earlier, all along the Brownfields redevelopment process, communities are going to have questions. You can call us or email us with those questions and we'll provide the answers. But you may need more assistance than just a quick answer. And we recognize that every community's needs and challenges are different, and the type and depth of our technical assistance will be tailored to your needs. So let me give you some examples of the type of one-on-one assistance that we typically provide. We'll work with communities to identify different brownfield funding sources. Like I said, we review draft EPA grant applications and provide suggestions on how to strengthen them. We've provided this service for hundreds of applicants throughout the years. We will help you develop strategies on how to market your brownfield sites. If your town has many brownfield sites and you just don't know which ones you should focus on first, second, or third, we'll help design a project prioritization process for you to help you focus on that low-hanging fruit. And so these are just some of the examples. And again, we'll tailor our assistance to meet your particular needs. If you don't know what type of assistance you need from NJIT TAB, that's okay. Give us a call. We'll have a conversation about your particular brownfield challenges, and then we'll offer up some way that we can help you overcome those challenges. All right, so now for the reason that you joined us today, starting early in order to have a more competitive EPA brownfield grant application. So submitting an EPA brownfields grant application requires some effort, and typically there are only 6 weeks from the request for applications, or RFA, and that's when the guidelines are released, to the application submission date. And that's not a lot of time to prepare all that is required to have a competitive application. So if that RFA release date is your jumping off point for applying, you're already in a very weak position as far as having a competitive application. I also want to state that this webinar is the first installment on application writing and then the grant guidelines, and that NJIT as well as EPA will be conducting additional grant application webinars in the time leading up to this year's solicitation, which is my understanding is going to be in the fall. So common, and some of the things that we may cover in those webinars may include common mistakes. We go over the guidelines, as well as some strategies on writing a competitive grant. The reason that we break these instructional webinars into more digestible portions is that, this can seem a little bit overwhelming, and there are things that can be done at certain phases. So that is the idea behind breaking it up and giving you these instructional videos in smaller sound bites. So EPA has a number of brownfield grants available. They're on an annual basis, which includes assessment, revolving loan fund, or RLF, cleanup, and multi-purpose grants. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail regarding grant types, as there are many resources available that do so. The goal of this webinar is to focus on early tasks that you can begin, and those tasks are for the most part applicable to all of the grant types. The types of brownfield grants available through EPA include assessment grants, which provide funding for brownfield inventories, planning, environmental assessments, and community outreach. Revolving loan fund, again, or RLF grants, which provide funding to capitalize loans that are used to clean up brownfields. Then there's the cleanup grants, which provide funding to carry out cleanup activities on brownfield sites by the applicant. And then last, there's the multi-purpose grants, which provide funding to conduct a range of eligible planning, assessment, and cleanup activities at one or more brownfield sites in your target area or target areas. So typically the RLF and multi-purpose grants are offered on alternating years. Revolving loan funds in the past have typically been on even fiscal years, multi-purpose on odd fiscal years. This upcoming solicitation, there will be no RLF grants available. So just keep that in mind. Eligible entities for these grants include state, county, local, and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits. And I should also note that these grants are extremely competitive with a very narrow cutoff. So in order to get funded, your application has to stand out. Or as we say, basically ordinary doesn't get funded. So you want to keep that in mind as well. So as I mentioned before, EPA solicits these grants on an annual basis. The typical solicitation cycle starts with the request for applications, or RFA, being released in the early fall. The application submission date is approximately 6 weeks after the request for applications. Then EPA announces the successful applicants the following spring. They just announced fiscal year 23 this week, and finally the funding becomes available to grantees in late summer. So it's roughly 1 year from the request for applications to the grant funds being available to the successful applicant. So why is starting early important in preparing a competitive application? Well, first, as I mentioned earlier, there are roughly 6 weeks from the request for applications to the submission date, and that's not a lot of time. And it's usually during the fall, which is typically a very busy time of year for most people. Second, it builds a solid planning foundation or continues existing planning efforts. In past years, EPA has put much more emphasis on the planning associated with a project. And although some planning activities are eligible under these grants, most successful applicants begin the planning process well in advance of applying. So regardless of the funding sources you may be pursuing, it's always recommended that projects be based on sound planning practices. Third, it provides time to address EPA application emphasis areas. Again, you only have 6 weeks to prepare the application, and EPA's emphasis areas may change from the previous year. So you have certain tasks, you'll have certain tasks completed prior to the request for application. That'll give you that additional 6-week window to focus on those new emphasis area criteria that may be in the application. And lastly, it allows for more involved technical assistance. As I mentioned earlier, NJIT Tab is a free resource to communities, and part of the services that we provide includes grant application critiques. And instead of you sending us your application just before submission, you'll be able to send it earlier, and we can provide you with assistance throughout its preparation. So for all the EPA Brownfield grants, the narrative ranking criteria is broken down into 4 major sections. The first section, section 1, is project area description and plans for revitalization. Section 2 includes community need and community engagement. Section 3 includes task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. And Section 4 includes programmatic capability and past performance. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on activities associated with the criteria within sections 1 and 2 of the application narrative that can be started early. And these sections are essentially the essay contest sections of the application, where you make your case for community need and you highlight your community involvement. Sections 3 and 4 of the application narrative are more pro forma in nature. So you basically, they ask the question and you provide the answer. So the tasks that you can begin early serve as the basis in the development of your project outline. Your project outline serves as a guide throughout the Brownfields redevelopment process, which is illustrated on this slide. It's obviously something that is developed during the early planning stages of that process, particularly prior to applying for an EPA Brownfields grant. This outline may vary slightly from the project to project, but they are all basically similar and will serve as your Brownfields redevelopment roadmap, assisting you engaging process and strategizing where to bring resources, both technical and funding, to bear during the project's lifetime. It is also critical in maintaining project continuity, as Brownfields projects typically take a bit longer than an average real estate redevelopment project, and staff and elected officials come and go. But when you have that roadmap in front of you, you have that reference point to always return to. I should also mention that your project outline will also serve as the basis for your EPA project work plan should you be awarded a Brownfields grant. So the tasks that we're going to focus on that provide the basis for the first 2 narrative criteria sections include community engagement. We're going to talk about demographic and health data collection, identification of relevant planning efforts and documentation, geographic and target area identification, and Brownfields identification and prioritization. So a critical element of a competitive EPA Brownfield grant application is the development of an inclusive and effective community engagement plan. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have all of the tasks associated with community engagement completed prior to the submission, but you can start thinking about what your engagement plan will look like and start the outreach process. One example where these activities can be initiated is in the identification and prioritization of the priority brownfield sites that you will highlight in your application. Having the community play a part in the identification of these sites shows community support and consideration for your project. And it helps define what the overall goals are and how they meet the community's needs. So you may have already conducted community engagement activity that support this. You should identify and document those activities and make sure that the community engagement plan you include in your application incorporates them. So assuming that you've not started or have done minimal community engagement for your project, the very first step should be to identify who your project stakeholders or partners are. When considering these stakeholders or partners, you should make sure you identify not only those affected by the project itself, but those that can bring effective resources as well as meaningful feedback and communication skills to the table. Don't just list as many as possible because you think it makes your application look good. You want quality over quantity here. So some of your typical partners include government agencies, federal, state, and local, real estate development professionals, colleges and universities, banks, lenders, your chamber of commerce. You want to think about business owners, neighborhood associations and other community groups, nonprofits, environmental consultants, and environmental justice organizations. Each one of those brings a specific area of expertise and resource to a project, and really can make or break a project. But sometimes you need to think outside of the box a little bit, and think about other organizations that may serve as partners, and that may include faith-based organizations, arts and culture community, as well as the medical community. They may bring another perspective. Arts and culture community can bring some really unique ideas on how to repurpose a site, and they also can bring some creative ideas on how to best market a site. So again, you want to kind of think outside the box. The second element of a competitive application that should be embarked upon early is demographic and health data, which is essentially the data that establishes and supports community need. So why is community need data critical to writing a competitive application? Well, first, it quantifies community needs and challenges. A strong application doesn't just make statements without the data to support those claims, including data such as poverty rates, unemployment, loss of tax base, population decline, as well as health statistics such as cancer rates, asthma rates, infant mortality, heart disease. Again, support those needs. Comparative data such as target area versus county, state, or national rates can be very compelling and again is critical to establishing community need. Second, it supports the community story. A strong brownfields application always tells a compelling story, and that story is comprised of three broad elements. First, you're going to outline the problem and the challenges that are faced by the community. Then you're going to outline how you're going to remedy those problems and challenges. And finally, you're going to outline what the results will be, or basically your outcomes of your project. So as I stated earlier, you're going to need to quantify and confirm those needs to support your story. And finally, it helps identify project goals by identifying and supporting community needs and challenges, which should be things you address in your project outcomes. So one of the biggest challenges in collecting this data for a particular focus area is finding current and available sources, particularly when it comes to health data. Gathering this data and crafting it into your narrative can be a time-consuming process, so the sooner you start, the better. Some common and readily available sources include census data, you have health department data, there's county health rankings, you can always go to the Center for Disease Control, there's state records, there's census tract data, there's community health needs assessments, there's EPA EJ screen, as well as EPA EnviroFacts. In some cases, data may not be readily available, so you need to look at other less common sources, and that may include Google Maps, recent local comprehensive or revitalization plans. You want to look through those and see if there's any data that you can extract from them. You want to look at comprehensive economic development strategies or other regional plans. Or you may want to look at local hospitals or urgent care centers for data such as asthma or lead poisoning admissions. Sometimes you're just going to be in an area where you're not going to have a plethora of data. You want to explain that in your application. Don't just skip the question. Explain why that data wasn't available. So, I'll give you an example. Region 2 includes the Caribbean, it includes Puerto Rico, and it's kind of hard to nail down accurate data there because a lot of people that live in Puerto Rico or on the islands, when they get ill, they go to the mainland for treatment. So once they leave, that all the recordation of their illnesses is captured elsewhere and not on any of the islands. So that would be an example of why you should explain why you may not have the data that you need. So on this slide, what I've done is I've provided you with a list of some data sources along with their URLs so that you can have a good place to start in gathering this data. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but I did want to point out 3 particularly useful websites that you can use to preliminarily identify vulnerable communities related to your selected or potential application focus areas. And these are EPA's EnviroFacts, EJ Screen, as well as CGEST. So EnviroFacts is a database that enables users to retrieve environmental information from multiple sources for whatever area you're interested in. You simply put in the address, a zip code, the city, the county, or the water body, even a park name, and whatever environmental data such as air quality, water quality, toxins, so on and so forth is available, and it will retrieve it. You can also use EJ Screen, which is a mapping and screening tool based on nationally consistent data that combines environmental and demographic indicators in maps and reports. If you visit the website for this software, there's our instructions on how to use the tool and how to understand the results that it generates. And then finally, there's CGEST, which is a tool that has an interactive map and uses data sets that are indicators of burdens in 8 categories, which include climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and workforce development. And again, this tool uses this information to identify communities that are experiencing these burdens. And what's really neat about the 3 tools that I just went through is that they're not a single source of data. They draw on multiple data sets to provide the information that you preen from them. So that's, it gives you a little bit of a wide breadth, and it does help you with a higher altitude identification of potential focus areas. Another element of a grant application is the identification of relevant planning efforts and documentation. So as I mentioned earlier, EPA places much emphasis on the planning related to these brownfield application projects. The reason for this is that a project that is based on solid planning has a greater chance of success. And good planning is a great indicator of community support and commitment to taking projects through to redevelopment. So it's not only important in the eyes of EPA, but developers want to see that they will have minimal obstacles in developing a property. And for any developer, time is money and a huge factor in whether a project is financially viable or not. So some plans that you might want to consider when you're developing your brownfield application include target area, specific redevelopment plans. You want to take a look at any existing master plans. You want to look at the area zoning, any transportation plans, so anything of that nature. So you want to make sure that these plans are related to your proposed project. And in some cases, there may not be any relevant plans like those I just mentioned that are available. However, any stakeholder or community engagement findings would be considered planning and to support a project. So you want to make sure that any engagement has been documented and that you include a description of what those findings were in your application. So next up is I'm going to talk a little bit about geographic area. So why is it necessary to engage the public, gather data, and identify existing planning efforts? All of this information will play a huge role in you identifying your geographic and target areas. So what is a geographic area and what is a target area? So I'll start with a geographic area. So in simple terms, your geographic area is the area that you're going to conduct eligible activities with your grant funds. So examples would include, municipal, county, regional, or state boundaries. So it's a much broader area. Your geographic boundary should include an area that suffers from brownfield challenges and impacts that you can quantify with data. It can include the applicants, and in some cases, a coalition member's jurisdictional or service area boundaries or a sub-area of those boundaries. Regardless of the area selected, it should make sense in terms of your overall project planning goals. And you want to make sure that you specifically describe the boundaries of your geographic area using applicable boundaries, whether they be geographic or roadways, rail lines, rivers, etc. So you have to keep in mind that your application reviewer more than likely has no idea what area you're describing and what that area looks like. So you want to make sure that you include that. So now that I've explained what a geographic area is, I'm going to discuss what a target area is and what the difference between it and a geographic, what the differences between it and a geographic area is. A target area is basically an area within the geographic area that has some type of cohesive element that distinguishes it. So some examples of this would include a downtown district. It could be a community gateway. It may be a waterfront area. It may be an industrial district, or it could be a corridor along a rail line or a highway. They also typically have common characteristics such as being communities that are EJ, underserved, they're aging and or minority, and therefore typically suffer from a lack of affordable housing. They have food deserts, there's disinvestment, high unemployment services, so on and so forth. And again, so why is it important to delineate a target area? Well, first, it serves as the foundation for a comprehensive planning approach. It shows that some forethought has gone into a brownfields project, and that reassures EPA that the project has a higher probability for success. And that's the kind of project that EPA wants to invest in with its brownfield grants. Second, it helps identify priority brownfields, which is a requirement in EPA brownfield grant applications. In your EPA brownfield grant, you're going to highlight those priority sites that best make your project case by emphasizing community needs and having the characteristics to potentially meet your project goals. It also enables you to identify sites that can be assembled to meet the needs for larger redevelopment types. Third, it'll help you focus redevelopment scenarios that meet the needs of your community. Having a target area identified with common community needs will make it easier to determine what type of redevelopment best serves the community. This is a common mistake made by many grant applicants. The needs just simply don't match the redevelopment plans. So, an example might be that throughout the application, you're identifying affordable housing as the needs, and then the goals for ultimate goal or the outputs for your project is for open space. So they don't match. So that's going to be a problem with your application. And lastly, it's going to help you leverage funding. By having a target area with identified specific needs, it makes it easier to identify what funding sources could be pursued to finance a project and has laid the foundation for applying for those funding resources. I should also mention that when applying for an EPA Brownfields grant, it's critical to be specific, again, when describing the boundaries of your target area. So don't just say it's the northeast quadrant of the city or town. Describe the exact boundaries, streets, rail line, rivers. This way, the EPA reviewer probably doesn't know what your area looks like or what area you're talking about. So this will help them exactly understand what area you're discussing. And then the last element that I wanted to discuss is brownfield identification and prioritization. So choosing the best sites to include in your application can make or break your brownfield grant application. So why is it so important? Well, first, it shows a comprehensive approach and that you have given careful thought to your project approach. Second, It makes the best case for your application story. You want to choose sites that have the best associated data to make your case. And third, it focuses project goals. And by that, I mean, if your project goal is open and green space, you want to have selected sites that can accommodate this type of reuse and is supported by consistent planning. So when you select your sites, you want to think about, is there an existing brownfield inventory, and are you drawing your sites from that inventory? Is the site located within your target area or project emphasis areas, such as a downtown or gateway? Does the site meet EPA's definition of a brownfield? You want to confirm with EPA's regional office that your site is in fact eligible. Does the data associated with your priority sites highlight your community's challenges to the greatest extent possible? Do your priority sites have the potential to meet project goals? Again, if your project goals are for open space or residential, make sure the sites can accommodate that type of reuse. To determine this, you want to consider the size of the site, what the zoning of the site is, and you want to also consider, site access such as roads, rail, or water. Let's see. Okay, next slide. So, to many of you, what I just covered may sound like a lot to do. And if you feel that way, then I kind of made my point as to why you should begin these particular grant elements as early as possible. But going beyond getting an early start, gathering this data allows you to determine your focus area and priority brownfield sites and to develop the most compelling and competitive brownfield application process. With all this information in front of you, it'll enable you to adjust focus or target area boundaries, select priority sites, and develop project goals that all relate to each other and emphasize your community's challenges to the greatest extent possible. And that's also another challenge many people struggle with. The goal here in these applications is to paint your community in the most impoverished light possible. And that's kind of counterintuitive. Most people want to focus on the positive and the achievements, but for the purposes of these grants, you want to show them in your worst light, and that's what makes for a good competitive grant. So with that, I will open it up for questions. Again, if you have any questions, I'd ask that you please type them into the Q&A pane. I'll give you a few minutes to do so. And it doesn't seem like there's any questions. Well, again, let me go to the next slide here. So I do apologize for the delay and the technical issue that we had with WebEx this morning. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but again, I'll repeat that this will be recorded, and I will send out a link to everybody that registered for this webinar so that they can go and review it, as well as the slide presentation. So with that, before I close out today's webinar, again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate. I hope that you found the webinar helpful. My contact information is up on this slide. Again, feel free to reach out to me should you have any additional questions. I also want to emphasize that NJIT TAB is available to assist you throughout the application process. It doesn't have to be just a one and done assistance. If you have multiple questions, call us multiple times or email us. So with that, I'm going to close out the webinar. Oh, wait, somebody did put, hold on here. Oh, I thought there was a question. No, there isn't. Okay, well, I'm going to close out the webinar. And again, thank you all for participating. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.